Artists and teachers think and talk a lot about creativity, so I have a lot of opinions to share with you and some of my own. First of all, it's really a big deal. Creativity ranks higher than skill, higher than fame, higher than fortune. Most artists are looking for that thing that will help them to be more creative. Jurors and curators of shows almost always mention creativity as one of the main criterion for the paintings that they choose. And art classes and teachers frequently cite increased creativity as a goal for their students. I know that all the descriptions of classes that I wrote said something about that. Artists, of course, are always looking for more creativity in their own work, and so it's a really important thing to us. Some artists are planners. They seek creativity by planning carefully and following the plan, but others are responders to the paint. Some plan first and then allow the painting to evolve as they go along, and some start without a plan at all and ask for help from the way the paint moves on the paper. I choose paint that does move, watercolor and acrylic. I allow it to flow and to kind of have its own way, at least for a little while in a painting. I want to show you a few of my paintings and tell you a little bit about how they were made. I chose this one to show because it changed so greatly in the process of painting it, and has very little to do with the start. I began by making a big, rather pale tree, and you can see that the paint was allowed to drip and to move a little bit there, but the way it was didn't satisfy me to begin with. So I changed the color. I didn't really care about the change. So eventually it became this really red tree with a little bit of the blue background showing through it. And then, since there didn't seem to be enough there to be really a painting, I added a bird. I added this bird. And while I liked the way he looked, he wasn't very well placed to make a good composition. So I thought about what I could do about that, and I thought if we put another one over here, that it might help that, and indeed it does. It makes you kind of, your eye move about in the painting there. And even though they're both pointed the same way, and he's kind of pointed out of the painting, I think it works now. And then to make it make sense, I added some elements of a nest at the bottom of the painting. And those are scratched out of the paint, which by now was pretty heavy, so we could remove it with the handle of a brush or with some other sharp object. And so we have these lines at the bottom of the painting making the nest. And I called it the courtship. The other painting that I'm going to show you, get rid of the reflections here, are these jellyfish And this was a demonstration painting, so it was painted rather rapidly, but it took some planning. I couldn't just dive into it like I did in the other painting because it's done in transparent watercolor, and it's therefore everything shows. To get the whites and the lights here, I had to either paint around them or I had to do something to mask them out. And since these are so small, they would be difficult to paint around. So I used masking fluid there, which is a substance that you can paint on with a brush and allow to dry. And then it's kind of like rubber cement, and it protects the paper from the paint. So then I can go in quite loosely, freely, and paint right over those. And yet, when everything's dry, the rubber cement or the masking fluid can be rubbed off, and voila, there will be a white area underneath it. The big whites I painted around because I didn't want to do that much masking fluid. The background areas are painted very wet and loosely, and I did have a bit of a drawing on here, but my original drawing had only the main jellyfish in it. I think even this one may have just been allowed to appear as the paint moved around, kind of having its own way on the paper. But as the painting progressed, I began to see other things that I could put in that were just suggested by the way the paint moved. And then at the end of the painting, I rubbed off the masking fluid, and I had these delicate little whites in there. But I also had a big surprise because when I took off the masking, I also took off the surfaces, some of the rather delicate paper I was using. And so I had to be creative and find a way to use those areas that that were not intended to be white, but were suddenly very white. And this painting then became called Surf Sway, because I've used a lot of names for paintings of jellyfish, but I think it kind of, they dance and they sway within the surf there. Now I'm going to put a little paint on paper here for you and show you how I might begin a painting with more or less nothing in mind, and then eventually allow it to suggest images and become a painting. Let me show you first of all. I'm going to use, I'm going to sprinkle a little salt on this painting while the paint's wet, and what will happen is the, I don't know if you can see this. Let me get a little closer. The salt crystals take up the paint and the pigment, and they leave a kind of a lovely texture, little subtle white spots in the paint when it's dry. Now, with what I'm going to do now, you won't be able to see the end results of that, but we'll show you how it's done. There are a lot of techniques, a lot of kind of tricky things you can do with water media because the paint does so many charming things on its own, and the artists are inventive, so they find things to use like cleaning products and salt and alcohol and saran wrap, all sorts of things that you can use besides paint to create interesting effects. I'm just putting water on here now. The reason I'm doing that is to kind of direct the flow of the paint a little bit there, and the water will tend to attract the paint and dilute the paint and let some interesting things happen. I'm going to use a pretty dark staining color because I want it to be kind of dramatic to begin with. And you see what fun you can have letting this kind of do some of its own thing. I'm going to pick this up and let it run a little bit. You can see how it's moving. And there's some fine lines caused by drips. There's some nice downward blending there. And now I'm going to add some different colors. Although it would be possible to stop at this point and wait for it to dry and see what it suggested. But let's go a little further. I'm going to use a dark. No, that's not what I want. Kind of a purpley red there. And I put a little bit more purple in it. A little bit of splattering. And by the way, my composition here is called a cruciform. And I do think that more than image, composition is very important, and I stress that in my classes. So it's a way of leading you through my painting and getting you to look at it. Now we've got some warm color, the red, and some cool color, the blue, and we're letting them blend a little bit on their own. And I have more of the blue than I have of the red because it's always better to have an unequal balance. And speaking of unequal, I also have left negative areas here that are unequal. This is different in length and size and shape from this, and from this. And they may not stay that way, but that's the way, it's a good beginning. I have some little dots left here that were on the paint, on the paper before I even started, because yesterday I painted on the other side of this paper. But since this was going to be very spontaneous anyway, I thought the dots might add something, and I do think they kind of make an interesting little area there. Let's put a little, well, let's give this a little spray here to blend it a little more.
Yes.
And then I'm going to put on a little bit of salt too, so I'll have some texture in here. This has to be done while it's wet. And then the salt will attract the dampness and some of the pigment, and I'll have texture in there. And this is the point at which I'm going to stop on this. And of course, a lot more will be done to it. And I have no idea what it's going to be now, although it kind of suggests a flow of water. It could also suggest wings of butterflies, which I paint a lot. I don't know yet, but time will tell. And if it turns out well, I'll show it to you later. Here's the end of the beginning of this painting.